Exciting. Good morning. So this activity plan covers strategic policy and climate resilience. I'll take it as read. I have with me my two team leaders that cover those two areas, Elizabeth for strategic policy, Lisa for climate resilience. You can see from page 4 of this document, if I can find page 4, there we go. What this activity covers in terms of strategic policy, our bylaws and regulatory policy, strategic policy and advice, and submissions as another example of the work that we've done over the past 12 months and will continue to do in terms of the changes that central government are making to local government, and in terms of climate resilience, implementation of our resilience strategy, and other functions there in terms of emissions reduction and other strategic advice. So this activity plan covers advice to elected members and our executive team and to the rest of the organisation. It is effectively made up of 2 policy teams. You'll see in terms of our levels of service, there are a number of changes that we're making in terms of from the existing activity plan. This is reflective of internal changes to the organisation, and the new activity plan reflecting solely the services delivered by these 2 units. Any questions?
Nope. Sarah, Tim, please.
Yeah, I just guess with regards to climate resilience, how closely do we work in with the central government, not relevant to parties, because some of the decisions that are made in Wellington kind of hamstring us about what we can do with certain areas?
Yep. So through the obviously through the formal submission processes that we undertake, and you've seen plenty of those in the past 12 months, we're engaging through those formal processes, but we also have other engagements that we undertake with colleagues in government departments.
Yep.
So we obviously have relationships with staff in MFE, for example, and we engage with them on the work that they're intending to do and undertake. And we are part of various networks that both local and central government.
Because I'm sure we're not alone, because I know South Dunedin has flooding issues, and Invercargill's airport's very low lying, etc. So I guess these issues are going to start becoming more prevalent as we go forward.
Yeah, and if you look at in terms of the draft strategic framework, where climate resilience is one of your strategic priorities.
Yeah.
This is going to become a growing area, which is why we've reshaped internally and put more emphasis on climate resilience and developed a specific climate resilience team that can work across the organisation and with our colleagues, and then obviously externally as well, representing council's views.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Sarah?
Thanks for that. One thing that's new that's just cropped up in the last week, which I'm finding really concerning, is the new move from the government for what's been termed a climate buyout. That's a 50-50 split currently between central government and councils, although councils are yet to sort of consult and vote on that. And until now, council has clearly not had any legal responsibility for private property for that hazard kind of stuff. This is likely to set a precedent, and it's something that we haven't addressed as a council because it hasn't been a legal responsibility of ours, and we've still got Adaptation Act coming up. Last term, the Coastal Hazards Working Group looked at some sort of levy. This would be enormously expensive, and adaptation is going to be. Could we get some advice on the potential impacts of that sort of potential precedent setting move up north? because there's likely to be impacts for our planning, our finances, all of those kind of things. But also on that climate levy space, so that we are taking intergenerational equity into account, which is what we said we'd done a framework for paying for the adaptation that's going to be needed, likely sooner than later.
Yep. So I'll take that as a request for advice outside of the activity plan that's in front of us at the moment. But you raise a really good point. I know a number of our colleagues in councils in the North Island are concerned about that particular policy in terms of the 50-50 split, because that does present significant liability, I guess. So that's something that we're trying to understand. In terms of that cross the adaptation, that program of work that we currently have in play here in this district, that program of work sits outside of my activity plan and sits within John's, and he will, I think, talk to it shortly. But you're right in terms of that intergenerational equity requirement and the costs that will play out as adaptation progresses, because it will be a significant financial issue for all councils.
Yeah. So John, will you be able to talk to that when you come up? Cool, thanks.
Yep.
Thank you, Yanni.
I think three things from me. One is, how would we get a strategy around EVs in the city? Like, I'm just really concerned that we've put money on budget that we haven't spent, that we don't seem to have any coordinated EV charging infrastructure strategy as a city. And although there's talk of like the shared EV fleet, obviously there's a number of things that we do in the EV space outside of that through our council companies like Orion and working with government and sustainability funding. So I just was trying to kind of, I guess, understand around that EV strategy for the city. What is it? And if we don't have one, what's the best way to get it as an activity so that we actually look at what we're doing?
Yep. So EV charging, as you know, is the whole area of EVs and EV charging is developing technology, and that is being rolled out in a number of ways, both privately and publicly. So there are a number of private organisations that are putting in place EV charging across New Zealand, and the government's involved in this space as well. We can certainly look at and work with our colleagues in property and infrastructure around what a strategy for EV charging for council land would be. But I would just say that we do need to consider what our role is in this space and what the private sector's role is in this space, and we don't want to be doubling up.
Yeah, no, I agree that we don't want to double up. I guess what was concerning was that Orion put up their prices on their charges on council facilities, saying that was what the market was doing, when actually the market's also providing free EV charging at a number of places as well. And we've got community centres that don't have any EV chargers, places like Riccarton, for example, which stand out, versus other areas which seem to have an oversupply. So I do think it would be good to try and have some sense of, we also had money on budget as well that we haven't spent.
No.
And I don't quite understand, where that's all got to. But yeah, I would welcome us just having something in here that does talk about just coming up with a high level sort of look at, what our role is.
Okay, we can have a look at that.
How we're dealing with that. The second question was around the Healthy Food Action Plan and food resilience. And I think when we adopted the climate change strategy, we did talk about that as being important.
That is one of the streams, yes, one of the 10 streams.
Right. I didn't see anything in here.
We haven't gone down to that level of detail in terms of because there's 10 streams within the strategy, so we're not calling out particular streams within that strategy. So we're just calling out the strategy itself.
Right. But so things like support for locally grown food, for example, like we're having a lot of debates around funding, around support for, I guess, alternative healthy food. So is there something we could give more visibility to? Because we've got the action plan, but we're sort of struggling to get it implemented.
I think as part of the work of implementing the strategy that we have now, those are the sorts of things that would come out of that, and we can come back to council on those actions. But it's not the sort of level of detail you'd probably see in an activity plan itself.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
And
you.
just the only other question I wanted to ask was just around, I guess that kind of, and I don't know if this is kind of in this one or the next one, but like the land use planning.
The next one.
So the strategic advice around like things like master plans or
yes,
having an area plan or a spatial plan.
That's definitely
okay.
John's area. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Melanie.
My question's more at a higher level, possibly higher than this. It's more just that I can't quite see how all of these presentations all fit together. Like, does this area strategic policy overarch everything else? I'm trying to, because everything's being reorganised. I was just wanting to see how all the pieces all fit together, especially because, yeah. Can you answer that, or is there somewhere we can go to see an overall structure
of this process, Peter?
There's nothing prepared that acts as a diagram to explain the three activities, but we put them together as a group here today with the objective of them spelling out their services. There has been some structural change since the last LTP, and that may be what you're alluding to. So that's why we start with what does this thing do? But there is no diagram that explains what it doesn't do and that it's moved somewhere else. So if you like, we can take it offline and step through the differences, but it isn't a simple diagram.
There also used to be just a structure of all the units, just of council and who were the heads of this and that. And I can't see anything on the website now after a very brief look of just how everything is sort of aligned.
Okay. Look, without taking a great deal of time away from David and the team, LTPs are not structured on the way we organise ourselves as staff. They're structured on activities. The logic being that's what we deliver to the public. And so the activities are the services we provide, not necessarily how we structure ourselves, because that's quite fluid at times. So I'd be happy to sit down with you and work through what falls to which activities and how they relate to each other, but it is probably a more detailed conversation than we have time for today. But it isn't to do with how our units are structured. It's to do with the services we provide so that the LTP makes sense to the community. Yeah. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Carry on.
I'm done.
You're done? Oh, is that as good as it gets?
Oh.
Okay.
Couldn't get any better.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good on you. Wait, this is good. Hello, John. Just one question while I've got you here. Yes. How are we going? Just for my wee brain information. How are we going with the amount of consents we're getting in and how we're getting out? Are we getting ahead of it? Because a year or so it was a bit gnarly.
Yeah, so resource consents is improving. So last year we ended up at 79% were being processed on time. First month of this year we're up to 90%. So we're making some good inroads there. That's a sort of a combination of we've implemented a number of strategies to be able to get through them quicker and also lower application numbers coming in. So that's allowed us to get largely on top of it. So we're seeing continued improvement in that area.
And you may not know, building consents a little easier as well, better, or you may not know?
There's been some improvements there, but I think they're slightly behind us, and that's the nature of how the consenting process works. Resource consents are usually running ahead several months because developers get resource consents first, and then building consents lags several months behind. So they might be just that sort of 2 or 3 months behind us in terms of what they're seeing improving.
This is great because I was talking to the chair of ECAN the other day. And where the councillors know it not, if you are behind after a certain time on a resource consent, you have to refund some money, don't you?
Yes, that's a real issue for us because
You don't like giving it back.
Yeah, it's 1% of the processing fees for every day you exceed the statutory time frame, up to a maximum of 50%. Right. So as I understand it, ECAN are largely discounting 50% of their revenue.
Because he was saying that they have budgeted $2 million for the give back.
Yeah, that'd be about right. Yeah.
Which is, thank you, you're not doing it.
Yeah. So I mean, we have been in that space, and we are on the improve though. So yeah, that's what's in. Yeah. So we have had to give back discount fees as well. So we've been in that space, not as bad as ECAN.
Oh, that's good. I'm very pleased to hear you up in the 90s. That's good work. Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah, thank you for allowing us to present this plan. I'll just skip to this page here, page 5. This is the services that this activity plan covers. And before I start that, I should really introduce Jane Morgan, who's team leader of the Coastal Hazard Adaptation Planning team. And she will be able to sort of answer some of those questions that Councillor Templeton and Councillor Scandrett raised before. So going back to the activity plan, the services it covers, resource consents, development contribution assessments, planning public advice, resource consent monitoring, and clean fill sites monitoring, district plan, spatial planning, strategic transport or transport policy, coastal hazards adaptation planning, climate hazard risk screening, heritage, and urban design. So it's quite a range of services this activity's covering. I will skip to why we deliver this service. Some of the services that we deliver are statutory, so we're required to deliver them. That's resource consents and the district plan. Otherwise, there's strong alignment with our community outcomes, strategic priorities, and climate resilience goals. I'll just fast forward. Levels of service. We've got 17 levels of service. They largely reflect the activities that are being delivered. Probably the key one to mention in terms of changing is a proposed change in resource consent processing timeframes from 99% out on statutory timeframe to 95%. That just provides us a little bit more flexibility to not have to meet the statutory timeframe every time. And a lot of councillors will be aware that there is a statutory target of 100%, requirement of 100%. We're 99% at the moment in terms of our target. We're proposing 95%. The nature of resource consents is they're quite lumpy. So, you know, one month we get 200, another month we get 100, and trying to manage our resources within that quite sort of up and down environment can be quite challenging. So we're just proposing a bit more flexibility within that time frame. Otherwise, the remainder of the levels of services stay fairly similar. Okay, so that's about all. I was just going to mention too that largely in terms of funding, largely rates funded, except for resource consent, which is user pays, and that service is pretty much all funded from resource consent processing. We do have some proposals that we want to put forward as part of this co-development sort of process. And the first is around coastal hazards adaptation planning. We want to accelerate, what we're proposing there is accelerating that program of works. It's the planning side at the moment that we're looking to accelerate, and we're talking about that would be in the area of 1.75 million to accelerate that program of work. And Jane can explain that a bit more soon when if there's some questions around that. The second relates to the spatial planning, and we've got a number of spatial plans that will be finalised early next year onwards, and we need more specialist support to implement those spatial plans, and they'll be largely around local area planning. And the third is around heritage incentive grants, and the grant scheme expires mid next year, and we're proposing a continuation of that, a total of 500,000 in terms of with respect to heritage grants. That's all I've got to say at this moment, but I'm happy to take. We're happy to take questions.
Tim, then Victoria, and then Sarah.
Just two things which would be really good to get a bit of an idea of. First of all, the spatial planning. So, for instance, we've got areas now in Christchurch, due to the intensification, the local schools are struggling to take on the influx. And so that, to me, is bad planning from central government not understanding or working with us. So, and I'm just wondering about the rest of the infrastructure underground that we've got, because we know, say in Sprayed, in my area, we've got high flood hazard or high flood areas where they have to have take the water into holding vessels, if you like,
holding tanks.
So, and there's intensification. The other one is with the spatial planning and those coastal hazard areas. What can we do there? Because that's going to be something else. That's another gift from nature that we don't need right now, but in the next 20 to 30 years. So I'm just wondering how that fits in and how we link that with central government's planning. And because my understanding is if it's allowed through central government, we have no say in it anyway.
Yeah. So I might start off, and then Jane might want to add to that discussion. But spatial planning is looking at the areas we want to grow and where we don't want growth to happen. We have had PC14 sort of imposed on us, so that's sort of got ahead, and we've been able to sort of pull that back a wee bit, but probably not to the extent that everybody wanted. But we are, after the spatial plans, it's identifying areas where we do want to look at in terms of growth, or look at in terms of other issues, such as hazards. So that is an ongoing piece of work that will start soon, and that's what part of the proposal is about, is funding those pieces of work.
Okay, Victoria, you all right? All good? Yep. Victoria, please.
Thank you. You're talking about some of that climate resilience, the work that you want to accelerate, the planning aspects. Are you proposing some substitutions? Were you going to be deferring some other works in order that you can accelerate these particular work streams, or how are you proposing to resource that?
So there will be a sort of diversion of work, but that won't be in terms of the coastal hazards adaptation planning work. We're proposing some new diversion of resources there, but also some new resource.
So that brings me to the new resource you were talking about. You're going to be needing some more specialist resource.
Yep.
I'm just conscious that everybody's looking for specialist resource at the moment as a result of the resource management reforms that are coming. Where are we at in terms of our current resource? Can we anticipate to see a little bit of movement, and where do you think these specialist resources are going to come from?
Yeah, so from the planning side, and I'll let Jane talk about coastal hazards adaptation planning, but the planning side, we have a hump at the moment in terms of PC14, so a lot of the planning resources being diverted to getting that through that process at the moment. Once that's completed, we will be able to direct resource elsewhere, and that will be partly to the plan change priority program, so it'll be partly focused on that, and secondly to the spatial planning / local area planning. So there is some shortfall. It's a very low sort of specialist budget in that district planning area, so we need more. We're proposing more resource or more funding to support that program of work. Then the second part of that is the coastal hazards work, which Jane can probably talk to a bit more, but that's a different skill set. Again,
before we get onto that, it's not so much the funding, it's about where the bums on the seats are and where those resources are coming from, because I hear that there's this work we need to do. The big question for me is, how are we going to do this? That's the real issue that I'm concerned about. It's great to have these aspirations about what we want to achieve, but the question for me is how.
Yeah.
From a ability perspective.
Yeah. So as I said, in terms of the spatial planning side and the district plan and the local area planning, we will be able to divert some of the existing resource. So we have the right skill sets there largely, and we're able to push that resource around once PC14 is over. So we're okay there, but we are missing some specialist type people, and that's what we need the funding for in that planning area. And those probably will be out there. The market is getting better for some of that resource, particularly when PC14's over.
Thank you. Excellent. Sarah, please.
Thanks for that. So when it comes to the adaptation space, part of what we're needing is actually the coastal hazards plan change, that was due 2018 and has kept being pushed out because we've had other, urgent things that were supposed to be part of the last district plan review.
Yep.
Where are we sitting with timing for that so that we can stop people, subdividing and building in areas that are likely to be flooded in the future?
Yeah. I don't know the exact timing of when that is going to commence, that plan change. Do you have any visibility of?
It has been delayed a little bit because of PC14, which of course, as you know, has the qualifying matters around coastal hazards. So it has acted to also, I guess, manage some of the risk around further development. But we'd need to get Mark's update on the timing for that.
Yeah. PC14 finishes sort of middle of next year. So I wouldn't expect it to commence before that. We'll have the staff availability to commence it before that.
Yeah.
There is, as Jane just mentioned, there are qualifying matters overlays that are in place that will address intensification in those areas. So there is already some restrictions.
But it does leave the current status quo where people can still do things under the current district plan.
To an extent, there are still areas that, for example, high flood management hazard areas, you can't. You've got existing use rights, but beyond that, you can't put new housing on those areas.
There was some because of the, yes. Anyway.
Yeah, well, there's two different parts.
Yeah, there was two parts with the with the overlay and stuff. So there's the stopping people building stuff and increasing risk, but then there's the adaptation planning, and we're looking at upscaling the current plan. So using what we're doing in Whakaropo, Littleton Harbour, and starting in other areas of the city. How much is proposed for us by the way of resource for that planning? So what we're getting at the moment is really always after trauma. What we're getting is either managed retreat or other adaptation measures put in after a community's already been flooded and gone through the devastation and stuff. What we're doing here is trying to get ahead of that. And it would be much cheaper for us to get ahead of it than to try and react once something's happened. So
that's exactly our thinking, and why we're putting this proposal forward to be considered.
And so how much extra resource are we putting in? Like, are we doubling, tripling the amount of work we can do in the planning space there?
In terms of the operational expenditure, we're proposing a second team, and that would essentially mean we can plan in 2 separate adaptation areas at any one time. It takes around about 1.5 years to 2 years to go through a full process, because it does work as fast as the community and mana whenua are able to work with us, and that can be different in different areas. So as you know, we're piloting it in Whakaropo and learning from that experience. But what we do know is that communities are starting to ask us, when are we coming to their area? And we've also got a lot of direction from our infrastructure and asset managers at council asking, what is the long-term plan in different areas, because that will help inform their investments and renewals and infrastructure. We also have some early analysis around, I guess, a criticality window. So what we know is that with 20 centimetres of sea level rise, which is only about 25 years away, about a quarter of our roads and a third of our pipes will be at risk. So we have got quite a significant, around about $3.2 billion worth of infrastructure at risk in the next sort of 25 years. So we do need to start speeding up our processes and getting clear direction.
So are we looking at doubling a similar team, so adding an extra team that's the same size? Because the current team and the work that's happening is happening in what's quite a small population-based community, and the other ones will be quite large. Is the new team going to be larger?
No, at the moment we're proposing 4 in the core team, but we are adding a role, or 2 roles around implementation and monitoring. At the moment, we don't have the capacity to establish a monitoring framework so that we are monitoring, reporting on those important signals and triggers, which indicate, we're getting closer to needing to act. So we have also put in 2 additional roles in that space, monitoring, reporting and implementation roles.
Yeah. So once the adaptation plan is signed off by council, everything will be monitored so that we can see how things are going. And
if we don't do that, we're really not actually being...
let them sit on a shelf.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And the last one is the funding for adaptation. We've seen really lots of really sudden events as well, recently this year in New Zealand. But as well as that, if we're planning on trying to get ahead of things, the adaptation stuff, the working group last term looked at the potential for a climate levy so that we can have for want of a better word, a fighting fund for adaptation, because we know that we don't have enough headroom financially to be able to cope with a large event, and say we needed a 50-50 buyout with government or something. That sort of stuff hasn't been planned for yet.
There's nothing in the activity plan around that.
Can we get some advice on that? Because it's something that the working group was quite keen to explore last term. And I know that being prepared for these things, it's all well and good having a plan that says this is the adaptation we're going to do, but if we can't fund it, that's a real loss for our communities.
Yep. So we can go away and consider that. Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah, Yanni, then Mel, then you.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand at the moment, how much capacity do we have to do plan changes? Like, can any plan change outside PC14 be worked on?
There are some plan changes that are being worked on. They're mainly sort of being carried over, so we've had to continue working on them, but it's a small amount. To be honest, the amount of resource that plan change 14 and 13 is taking is pretty much 95% of the team.
Right. So I'm just trying to understand how we can get away from the communities getting repeatedly frustrated that, they've come to us 5 years ago to do stuff and we're not doing it. At our community board yesterday, we had a briefing that there's going to be a plan change around the rowing facility that's going in, the flat water facility, but I don't have any confidence that time frame will be met. What's the best way that we can have some discretionary resource to actually respond to things that come up during the course of the LTP with the community?
I mean, at the moment, PC14 is a little bit unusual in how it's been sort of imposed on us, and also how much resource it's taken, because it's not like a normal plan change. They've put in a number of other process steps, which just means it's a little bit more a lot more resource intensive. I mean, aside from saying that we will have staff freeing up from mid next year, we just simply don't have the amount of resource to do other plan changes at this stage.
So could we hire consultants? And I'm just having watched an interesting documentary on consultants in Australia, I'm sort of reluctant to go down that route as a council, but I don't see how we can do things in a timely manner around district planning if we don't get external providers doing some of this work.
What I might do is for the next session, come back to you and prepare some information for that question,
right?
Just so I can consider it a bit more. Like I said, there'll be resourcing coming available, so we will have more space to spend on other plan changes once PC14 has been completed mid next year. We can consider some other options about how we accelerate the plan change program. The other sort of caution to all this is that we do have the new the Resource Management Act replacements coming online probably from the end of August.
So I'm just worried by the time we get on to getting resource to do district planning that we want to do, we won't even be responsible for it anymore.
Well, we will need to keep that in the back of our minds around when is it wise to spend money on doing new plan changes when we've got a whole new scheme coming into effect. Because we don't want to be spending lots and lots of money on plan changes that are only going to be around for the next, say, 2 years.
Right. So how will the local area? I'm still a little bit confused over the local area planning. It seems like 300K won't go very far. How will you prioritise within that program of what gets done, and how will that compete with existing demands that people have already made or requests that have already happened around planning?
So there'll be the obviously the plan changes. So there'll be a mix of plan changes and implementation of the spatial planning, which is local area planning, and that's being done jointly with Bruce. Will talk a bit more about that with his activity plan as well. But it's to prepare those plans, area plans.
So the map that we're looking at in page 91 is that what's going to inform that local area planning, or?
Yes, largely, yes.
Right. So areas like Walston, which have got a massive issue with the industrial residential interface, which have been struggling to get any progress through council, how can they have confidence in this LTP that resource will be made available and that work will happen?
There is obviously a plan change priority program, which that was part of that plan change. Yes, there is a careful balance between progressing those priority plan changes and progressing the local area planning work as well. So there will always be a demand for time, but we are proposing to progress both of those streams of work. But like I said, in the next session, I can come back and have considered that a bit more about how we will have so a bit more detail about the resources and how they will be split between those.
I think just at a high level, I guess the thing I'm interested in as a council is that we've got a whole bunch of environmental damage happening in certain areas of the city. We don't seem to have enough resource to proactively manage that risk, monitor that risk, whether it's the sediment stuff that we've heard about before, but certainly in that Walston area, there's a number of adverse events that have happened, and actually across the city as well. We've seen toxic spills, chemical spills happening. So I'm just interested in what we can do in regards to both the district planning level, having better monitoring of consented activities, and then also in terms of our district planning, how we can make resources available to look at the high risk or the high impact things that are happening. And the other thing I wondered is, in terms of heritage, whether we had a really good presentation at Community Board last night from around the flat water facility, but looking at the new ways of technology to be more sustainable. And I wonder whether we need to start thinking about not just heritage, which is important, but also actually sustainability of building materials and of trying to retain existing buildings rather than building new. And I wonder if we've given any thought into doing things differently as a city in terms of incentives around retaining existing buildings from a sustainability point of view, rather than having them knocked down and rebuilt at a huge cost to the environment.
Okay, I can sort of explore that a wee bit more, but there are other sort of grant funds as well, and I think there is one around sustainability.
It's quite minor in the scheme of stuff. It wouldn't really help with building retention. It would be more around that stuff.
Okay.
And the only other thing, is this where we talk about Greater Christchurch Joint Work Programme?
We support the Greater Christchurch program with planning resource, but I think that will sit in another activity plan.
Yeah, I guess I just raised concern that we've got a whole spaghetti junction of planning work happening with the Merrill Forum, the Greater Christchurch partnership, the government's urban growth partnership, ECAN Council, central government, and I guess I'm just concerned that there's a lot of duplication going on, especially across things like the climate space. So yeah, I guess it's just to throw that up. Yeah.
So just want to chuck something in here. Are we asking you for a whole lot of work that may not, I know Yanni's passionate about it and putting it in. Are we asking you to go and we're out a whole lot of pencils and stuff which may not make a lot of difference, or have you already got it in your report anyway? Sorry.
It's not in the report. The main question I think Yanni is Councillor Johansson's asking is around the planning resource and whether there's adequate planning resource to be able to do this, these different pieces of work, such as the priority plan changes and the local area planning, etc. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's basically around resource, and then just thinking about, what we might do differently, recognizing the climate stuff around sustainability. So again,
just keep it nice and tight rather than.
So it's the resource to actually do the work, to respond, and concern that we don't have sufficient resource, and then thinking forward for the next 10 years, whether we need to look at trying to retain buildings from a sustainability point of view rather than just a heritage point of view. So,
okay, thank you. Melanie, please.
My question, I've kind of got two very similar, but it's about the urban design stuff that's in the activity plan. And I noticed for the design panels, there's a level of service or target for 24-25, but then there's nothing for the years after that.
Wasn't it for the urban design panel?
Yeah, so that's page 75 of our briefing agenda.
I'll have to have a look at that, but the intention is not to cease the urban design panel after that period of time. So is that what you're?
I'm wondering, because that's what it looks like.
Yeah, that's not the intention. So I'll have a look at that.
Okay, and then this is sort of a side topic because it's related to the urban design advice is a new level of service, but it's obviously what's been happening for resource consent. And this is more around, I've just noticed a lot of the sort of multi-unit builds that have been going up have more recently, because one of the things I noticed when we were in panels, we'd often ask for different colours just to break up this big mess, and now they're just, some of the ones that have been built are just units, all the same colour. Personally, I think the colour's horrible, but it's not even that. It's more that they're just all, it looks like one huge building. And so I'm just wondering what's happening with the advice around that kind of thing, just to make them more aesthetically broken up.
Yeah.
Because the ones that are look a lot better.
Yeah. Sometimes it can relate to what provisions are in the district plan. If they're in a district zone, in a different zoning, they have different urban design requirements. So some of them won't have any urban design requirements, and some will allow us to assess urban design. But if we are able to assess those proposals for urban design matters, then we will be looking at matters such as that.
Okay.
Tim, did you have another wee question?
Two quick ones, I guess. With regards to the what we can dictate in our city plan and retain, would be really good to just send out a brief or just a memo about that, because there are a few questions raised today about district plans and areas, etc. Because some of it is overridden by central government, as we know with Plan Change 14, and the other one is building materials, etc. Like just to explain that what we would like to set out and what is actually, it's dictated by MB, not us. And we actually can't step outside that. We cannot, if it's accepted by MB, then we actually have no real say. Copper would be an example of that in our waterways.
Yep.
Just to give those councillors, especially the new ones, a bit of a lead on that. I guess, but the more important question is that, because Jane, you mentioned with regards to sea level rise, and was it 2 centimetres or in the next 25 years? 20 centimetres. So could we get a monitor on the accuracy of that? Because I know there was a jump a few years ago. We were working off one lot of, and then there was a jump. Because if you look at 25 years and we're looking at $3.5 billion worth of infrastructure being at risk, then a levy is pointless. Because if you're looking at 25 years, that's 8 terms. I've been here 4 terms. Yanni's been here about 80, but we won't get there. But I mean, I think we need to have a realisation of how this is coming towards us, because I still get people that don't believe that there's climate change coming. So, you know, like it would be good to have an understanding, because rather than us looking at 3-year terms, we've got to start spreading a vision. But this table has to, not you guys, you're fully aware of it, but if you kind of see where I'm coming from.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'd say about that. One is that the costs aren't all going to be 20 years off.
No,
We're going to have to start funding in advance some of these things. We do monitor sea level rise. It's quite a fraught science because it does depend on how much we reduce emissions as a world, as the globe.
Yep.
But we also have, and we have some peculiarities in Christchurch. We've got a lot of vertical land movement post earthquakes after the land has subsided, which means the seas are rising faster in some parts of our district. We do have a lot of that information on our website, but the other another thing we are asking for some small amount of additional budget for is our risk screening, which is essentially what you're talking about, so that perhaps annually we produce a report for the district looking ahead with the most accurate available science we have across all climate hazards, so we can see where the risks lie and where the priorities are for our attention.
But surely a lot of that's coming from the central government and NIWA?
No, most of ours is being actually funded by council. NIWA operates essentially like another contractor, and we've used Tonkin and Taylor for our work in the past, and we typically use Jacobs now.
So what's central government doing here?
Yeah, I think the monitoring role is something that central government really should and could pick up, or regional council, and we have had those conversations, but at the moment that's not on their work program.
It's insane, isn't it? It's actually insane.
Yeah.
But look, thank you. Just
okay. Are you there, Andre? Andre, I'm on it.
Thank you. I was just going to ask how much of your resources on PC14 go into fighting for these qualifying matters. So, for example, we are trying to stop building houses around Riccarton Moor because there's a bush nearby. Like how many resources have to go into those individual qualifying matters, and would fighting for less of them require less resources, if you know what I mean?
It's a bit hard to split it up like that, but there is some resource going into those specific qualifying matters, but it's just a bit more of a package that it's difficult to split it out like that. But overall, there's a lot of resource being dedicated to Plan Change 14. They're preparing evidence at the moment for the hearings, and the evidence requirements from the IHP are high, meaning it's a lot of work for the team.
Yeah. So, okay. So presumably that means evidence is being prepared to prove that 2 stories near a bush would be fine, but 3 stories would jeopardize a bush, for example. Like to me, that wouldn't seem like a good use of resources. But hey, that's just me.
Yeah, partly resources being dedicated to that specific matter, but there's obviously a lot more matters they're preparing evidence on as well.
Yeah. Cool. No, thank you.
Good on you. Sarah, please.
Thanks. Hey, when it comes to the actual levels of service that we're measuring and those kind of things, I'm just noticing in the heritage thing that there are 2 there. We're trying to, one of the things we wanted to do was to try and lower the numbers of levels of service we've got. There's one here, effectively administer all heritage grants, and it's always at 100%. And I'm just wondering whether that particular one could go in with all of the other, like if there was one that said effectively administer all grants.
Across the council
kind of thing, rather than each kind of section in its own thing. And then there's a new level of service proposed by the heritage team, which is to hold an annual heritage festival. And I'm wondering if that's an appropriate thing for a level of service, whereas it's just actually in the events and festivals, it's contestable funding anyway. It would be a difficult thing to weigh up against. And it also seems much less important than, for example, having a level of service on risk screening and monitoring for hazards. You know, it's that kind of, and I'd like to see us having some sort of level of service that does talk to us actually actively screening and monitoring for the hazards that are likely to impact our communities. And if that could be looked at, that would be, I think, really useful. Thanks.
And lastly, so far, Celeste, please.
Hi, thank you. In terms of the climate resilience program, have we looked at what additional resource might be useful for some of the community boards that will be responding to some of the programs of work which will be focused in the areas? I'm aware that if we're going to be looking at ramping up the adaptation program, you know, communities probably won't be prepared for further consultation, but they would be if community boards and we've got a bit more resource to sort of bring communities on that journey, then it might be easier to sort of then start that work alongside it. Because I think we need to be looking at both aspects.
Yeah, so yes, we're actively looking at that aspect. It's an ongoing discussion. Do you want to get the latest update?
I guess in terms of the operational costs associated with running an adaptation planning program, there are some that are focused on community capability and capacity. And so, for example, we have a community board representative sitting on the coastal panels, and we work very closely with our community governance colleagues. So there is some crossover there.
Yeah, just to close it off, it is somewhere where we've had the same thought about what opportunities exist. So it is something that's being actively explored.
Great. And just in terms of a bit of feedback, with some of those community boards, because this community development advisors are quite stretched as it is, and we know that they're sort of managing a lot of other work streams, which have sort of come up out of things like the organics processing plan and things. There's sort of all extra things that they're dealing with in one way or another. What I would be keen to explore is whether we can actually put in additional resource. So someone that's dedicated has maybe some expertise in climate resilience adaptation work to sit on those community boards to provide advice to communities in that space. So not just utilising existing resource, but seeing how we can add in the resource to those teams. So if we could get some advice on that, would be appreciated.
Yeah. That would sort of sit more in John Felzell's activity plan. So I will pass that question on to him, and he'll be prepared for it when he presents his activity plan.
Great, thank you.
And Tyler, please.
Kia ora. This may not be for you, but I've just got a question around treaty staff and where they sit, what unit they would sit in under this. Which activity plan would they sit under?
The treaty.
The treaty advisors.
Yeah, so they'll be those targets will be integrated across activity plans. There was going to be a small activity plan for them, but the treaty advisors have identified that that's not their preference. That's actually they want to see it embedded across council activities.
Which is very fair. So how would we ask questions in that space if they're across activity plans?
So we can have a presentation from that area, but you wouldn't usually build an entire activity plan around two people.
Okay.
You want it embedded in everything.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We can just go to the last slide, please. That. All right, thanks everyone. I'm here today to talk about the City Growth and Property Activity Plan. You heard from me with the Community Housing one last week. I've got some of my team sitting in, listening and ready to come in for questions if needed. I've also got Kath Carter from Christchurch NZ. We work very closely with Christchurch NZ. We're very joined up and collaborative. So if there may be questions that you have, that Kath is better placed to answer. What we do, we've got three main functions, which is around the property space, broadly local area planning, also called regeneration at times, and case management. And those three areas are primarily focused on ensuring that Christchurch is thriving, prosperous and confident. I've got 3 minor functions as well. The other housing initiatives, such as the regional housing space, which is essentially the stuff that's not funded by the Housing Development Fund. We have a business liaison and an economic development role as well. And they're about trust, confidence, partnerships. So the main strategies that we're looking to do over the next 10 years, but with a particular focus over the next 3, looking to facilitate initiatives that utilise council-owned land to generate community outcomes. That might include releasing capital, but it's other outcomes as well. And we'll do that as council, but also in collaboration with other agencies such as Christchurch NZ. And we can see a role for the Runanga and Ngāi Tahu in some of that as well. We also support the organisational through more of the transactional property activities, acquiring land, leasing it, property rights, disposals. And we will be putting forward through the LTP a disposal program again. We are anticipating that will probably be around 80 properties that will come through there, but still very small amounts compared to our portfolio. One of the other strategies or sub-strategies we're looking at there, and sorry to get to detail, is just also increasing our transparency around acquisitions. We know we've had over 1% per annum growth in the portfolio over the last 11 years. We're anticipating for the next 10, it's going to be between 0 and 1% growth each year. And that's a net figure even after the disposals that we do. And there's been a bit of focus there today on local area planning. That's another strategy we're looking at. We're trying to put together an achievable program within existing resources. So we're looking at focusing on a small number of locations identified within the wider strategies. So if you look at the map, where we're focusing on is the blue central city area, and starting to work with other partners on the eastern priority area, but with initial focus on the western end of that around the Linwood space. There is some new capital identified for that, and I'll get to that later in the presentation. We also provide non-regulatory options for council intervention. The one you're most familiar with at the moment is around the noise issues, but the other one that we'll be working on a lot is the vacant site differential rating and extending that into suburban areas. So we did consultation through the annual plan and through towards the LTP, we're looking at extending that program. And then finally, we continue to encourage and support development that addresses problems and creates employment, and particularly through our case management service, where we work with developers and others to, such as government departments, to make it easy to deal with council and make it easy to work through our processes. So we'll continue that program. Major change we have for levels of service is a new one, which is to generate positive community outcomes through the acquisition or disposal of property. Now, this is really, we're already doing it, but we've not had a level of service that really clearly identifies that and tells the public that we're doing that, and that is the basis for a lot of our work. So we really want to make it more obvious that we're doing that activity. In terms of impacts on OPEX and CAPEX, we'll be looking for an OPEX increase associated with the Court Theatre maintenance and operation. So that is a site which sits within the corporate portfolio. We will be searching to see if we can get substitutions to do that, but we're early days in that search for that. Within the CAPEX, we've allowed for some acquisitions to respond to densification, and that one will need to assess through the prioritisation process there. Particular focus of those is densification, the central city southwest neighbourhoods and in Sydenham. And the types of things we'll be looking at there is acquisition for green space, etc., to assist in those areas. There will be some capital revenue. We're not at a stage where we've got estimates on what that will be. In terms of risks and challenges that we face in this activity, certainly one will be our ability to deliver versus what expectations will be. You can see from this map that through the various planning documents and existing plans, there is a lot of potential activity. We cannot deliver all of that. And if we are trying to keep within the resources we've got, we really have to prioritise and take a limited focus. We're also, and it's been interesting listening to the discussion, one of the key risks that I've identified is the potential for climate change induced weather events and their consequences, and by consequences looking at the impact on the insurance and mortgage markets, to lead to a rapid red zoning exercise. I think that is a real risk. We've seen that happen this year already. We need to be ready for it, and it's not just having that funding and the policy. We know the implementation will be difficult, and especially as it appears the government is delegating that implementation to councils. So we're dealing with one at the moment, which is really difficult. If we're dealing with hundreds, we're going to have to really ramp up in that space. So I think I'll stop there and open up for questions.
Okay. I'll start because I've got to go soon. With the likes of getting more land, it's good. 2 years ago, I don't know if some of the younger new councillors know that last year or the year before we sold 1% of our surplus land and we got roughly about $40 million for it. Okay, and we don't miss that 1% of land that we got. But what you're saying, we're increasing by 1% every year, whether we like it or not, through bits and pieces that we sort of inherit. Yeah. So my question is, one of the ones that I think that we should be looking at anyway is, and I'd like your thoughts on this, like the transitional cathedral. It's one of the last blocks of land on that block that we should perhaps be owning, because if we can buy it off the church, they'll use that money towards the big cathedral and it might help them out, and then we get a piece of land that we should have anyway. Yeah.
Look, it's certainly something we can examine to see. I'm probably seeing it more from the perspective of will potential alternative uses on that site plus the NG site impact on the operation of Te Kaha in a negative way, and do we need to take action to manage that? So that's certainly something we could examine and provide some advice on.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, please.
Thanks. So you've talked a couple of times and you've mentioned that, you're really trying to do it within existing budgets when it comes to the operational stuff. But I'm looking at those areas on the map, and especially in Riccarton and Hornby, where they've had increased intensification over time with no kind of public amenity, public space, no planning for the traffic, all of that kind of stuff. The increased intensification that's coming, the MRT, what resource would be required if we wanted to be able to do those areas and not just sort of Sydenham in a city east?
So this is where the colour code comes in. The yellow is really in John's area. So I think that's where some of his focus is on, and those resources that he was seeking would cover those ones. My team, we're really focusing on the blue areas, so those existing master plans and those other immediate priorities I talked about. There is a green blob out towards the east. To date, the discussion has been whether Kāinga Ora would be the lead agency for that. So further discussion will be needed with those government partners around that. And then some of the pink is where Christchurch NZ is coming in, and that's their priority areas. So we're trying to work this through and balance responsibilities between various agencies and teams. But we also don't want to overpromise. Because one of the key restrictions we have is implementing. We know that from the suburban master plans, that once you get to your capital, you've got to prioritise. And some of the times, those master plans have a less of a priority. So we don't want to overpromise up front with the planning and then not deliver something.
Absolutely. And the CapEx that you've been asking for, that's for the central and sort of Sydenham area. And does it cover those other areas that are in John's purview or not?
Not at this stage, no.
Because I'm looking at areas like
Oh, hang
Riverton,
on.
especially where you've got the intensification that could really do with some green space in between all of those
Did we put any
medium density. Do you have green space capex in yours?
No, we don't, unless it's in covered in some of Bruce's. Is that maybe could explain that a wee bit more?
Yeah, no, I was just checking because I was just checking to see whether we'd allowed for anything short term in Hornby, but no, it's really only that Sydenham and Central City where we focus that capital for acquisitions at this stage.
Do we get some advice on the potential for adding some capex in maybe years 2, 3, 4, or 3, 4, 5, or something like that? For those areas that are really bereft of green space, especially like areas with really low tree canopy cover, low green space like Hornby, Riccarton and stuff, where there's lots of intensification happening.
Yeah, I'll just also mention too, there's another mechanism that we can fund some of that stuff, and that's around the development contributions.
Yeah. So if we could get some advice on the ability to do that and things, that would be great.
And that's part of the strategy as well, to have these in the plan so we can get development contributions on it. So that might also be looking at, without going to specific areas, just having a general acquisition aspect of it, albeit I will caution against that when I provide more advice on that as well.
Yeah, it could be like a strategic green space or something like that fund.
But that's where you need to caution on it.
Yep.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that the idea was to do some of this planning work and understand what is required in terms of green space. And
that's right. That's what I was saying. If we could maybe add some a little bit out. Once we've done that planning work. So are you also covering that sort of facilities maintenance-y kind of stuff?
No,
it's not yours.
No.
Okay, cool. I'll wait later. Thanks.
One of the other bit, now we're talking about green space, one of the other bits is there is a piece out in Riccarton Road out the end. Are you aware of that? That is a big grassy area that's got lots of trees on it. We mow it, but it doesn't belong to us. The people that own it want to get rid of it.
Don't know, but happy to take that offline and explore it if need be.
Because that's another one that will be popping up, and it'll help towards the purchase of something else. Righto, Timothy.
Yeah, thank you. We've had quite a bit of dialogue in public with regards to the developers saying that they're kind of in the dark with our roading plan, and that's especially around the Te Kaha streets, and there was something else I can't remember, but previously we've had a developers working group which was led by Councillor Goff. There just seems to be publicly, and it's mentioned by the developers, so that there's a disconnect as they don't understand or not kept up to speed. So I'm just don't have to answer it now, but could we get an understanding of what's happening, what's proposed, and how we can close that loop?
Yeah,
because there's a lot of work given by us, and it causes a lot of angst and work and undermines us publicly.
So not part of the LTP, but I'll send through some memos on that because we're very close to putting a staff group that and staff proposal on that forward.
And is that, I'm presuming that the developers have been involved in that as well, so it's closing the loop?
It will have a development focus on that, but I'll send a separate memo around about that.
Yeah, because it would be good to understand that.
Yep.
Andre? You, Andre?
Let's do that.
Is he there? Okay, Yanni.
This probably won't be a surprise, but relative housing affordability continues to worsen as inflation and interest rates continue to rise. Demographic changes are exacerbating unaffordability. We've got 2,411 applicants on the combined MSD housing and transfer list. We've got 800 adults, 700 children experience actual or transitional homelessness. And housing affordability is apparently a priority for 3 territorial authority partners individually, and everyone's got their own approach. But we haven't made progress on our housing affordability plan that we were supposed to do. So I'm just trying to sort of understand apparently now the Merrill Forum is now doing work on housing. So back to the point, I guess I was trying to understand before, is we've got Merrill Forum, GCP, Urban Growth Partnership, Council, CHIPS, the government, all working in that housing space, and yet we still don't have progress on a tangible action plan for the city.
Yep.
So what's the best way of, through this activity, to, like, how will the draft plan inform what we're doing in that housing space?
So this is correctly in this one. So the work that's happening is trying to align the Merrill Forum and the Greater Christchurch Partnership for the work that can be done there. Again, looking at focusing on the matters that we can actually influence, and also not addressing the problem areas rather than the areas which we've probably done as much as we can, which is in the social housing space, which is my other plan. So there is work going on to present that. Where I can see that coming, and this is one view only, is we'll focus on advocacy plans, potentially some work on what councils might do with the land, any surplus land they have, and how that contributes to addressing housing affordability, noting that we're already working in that space ourselves, and when we dispose of land, we really focus on housing outcomes as part of that. And there is a broader piece that we need to turn our mind to and work out how we deal with that, of lifting the quality of housing, of existing housing, while still keeping it affordable, which I think is a problem area, but we haven't got many levers to pull on that. So that would be where we're pushing that plan to achieve that. In terms of what we can actually do from a council perspective, and recognising that housing is not mentioned amongst your priorities, that where we will look at is trying to achieve additional affordable housing through our disposal and development program. So looking at some of the sites that we'll be disposing of, and working with affordable housing providers and consortia involving affordable housing providers to provide that housing.
So can I just be clear? Should we be putting into our LTP the work that's already been done through the GCP around the draft plan, a number of things in there? And I mean, I'm just going back, I'm reading what, September 2022, the Christchurch City Council, there'll be a collective approach led by City Council to agree specific actions where collective effort will accelerate the provision of affordable housing over the next 12 months. It's now been 12 months, and I'm completely unclear what actually has happened within that time.
There's not a lot with the existing resources has occurred. There is action happening now as we're getting some assistance and resources to achieve things. Does it need to be an LTP? We're saying that that broader function of working in that space is in the LTP already, so there's no additions needed on that.
Okay.
I guess I don't know how others feel, like, this is just incredibly frustrating, given that 2007 we actually identified a number of things that could make a difference to both housing affordability and sustainable development, and yet none of it seems to have happened through the urban development.
Can I just correct you there, Councillor? But since you've mentioned that, I've gone through that 2007 plan, and majority of those actions have actually been worked on or achieved. There are some that haven't, you're quite right there, but the majority have been. Happy to write that up as a report if you want, but I've looked through the document to do that assessment.
Things like inclusionary zoning.
Inclusionary zoning hasn't been done. That needs to be done at a national level. And we've seen the difficulties of doing it alone, which is what Queenstown's still doing it after 10 years of activity. This needs to be nationally driven, which needs the advocacy program, which is what I'm recommending you do.
So the other thing that was talked about being done in 2022 was a joint strategy on the issues of homelessness, emergency and transitional housing. So again, do we need resource for that?
So there is information coming through from the CHIP sector on that. That space is not one that council operates in directly. So if council wishes to do that, then it needs to make that decision if it wants to work in that space. But at the moment, we don't work in that space.
but we're dealing with the consequence, right? Like in the communities, we're having to provide safety patrols in the central city. We're having to do,
Yeah.
you know, community.
So your job is not to persuade me; it's persuade your colleagues that this is a priority and they should put money into it.
But yeah, through the chair, I mean, it's not the staff's role to divvy up the pot, it's ours. But do remember, way back in 2007 to now, the environment has changed hugely, and so have the pressures, the costs, and the values as well. So it's not staff's issue.
I know, but the question is,
Well,
should we
yes,
as
it is.
council
But it
start
falls
to be
back on
involved
us,
in
not
this
staff.
or
as
not?
Bruce
Well, I
pointed
guess,
out.
well, then we obviously have some structural issues with the GCP, right? Like we ask things to happen, they don't get done, they're not resourced, they're not a priority. I would argue housing is one of the biggest contributors to inequity and lack of prosperity.
And you are arguing that, Yanni. So I'm just wondering, can we just take this offline and try and
I sort of understand what resource we're providing to the GCP and the Mayoral Forum, and whether it's better we just actually hold that resource to ourselves and actually do that work ourselves rather than in a collaborative approach, which seems to have ended up with missing most milestones and timeframes.
I think that might be a bit rash to actually make a decision to actually remove some.
No, I'm asking the question. Could we get some
so
advice
why
around
don't we do some thinking and come
it?
back with some and have some discussion offline with you exactly what you're after.
Yeah, let's do that, Yanni.
Actually, Yanni,
we better move on because we're
a
fighting the
working
clock.
party, a working
Hang on, Tim.
meeting could be good.
Melanie's next.
This may be actually more for John, but it was about like yesterday there was a meeting with Kaingaora actually, and they're putting a whole lot of houses into the Hoonhay area and densifying that quite a lot. And what they're wanting to do is be proactive and work with council around I guess it's sort of, it is neighbourhood planning, I guess, like around what to do with roads, and it's stuff that happens with all intensification. But what you can do around parking and roads and the increased traffic, what amenities to put in parks, waste management and bins and all that kind of stuff. Is there, how do we look at that? Because it is a big issue, and I guess it is more, it's urban density regeneration stuff, but it's also quite complex.
So we're already working with KO doing exactly that kind of work in Shirley. So it surprises me that they're looking at doing a Hoonhay. We'll contact them and see whether that's something that we can work with them closely on. I suspect it's just different parts of KO not talking to each other about the relationships that we already have that are working quite well in other areas like Shirley.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Bruce. Yep. So Andre apparently is back. You got a question, Andre?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
I take it.
So that brings us to, is there anything else you wanted to add, Bruce?
No, I'm in your hands.
I think that's the end of the questions. Right, thank you. So that's the end of our LTP discussion, I believe. And